Obviously, we're all looking forward to being surprised on Christmas Day, but what are you allowed to tell us about your character, Tasha Lem?
I'm now allowed to tell you several things. I wasn't at first, but we do know. Well, I'll tell you about Tasha Lem first, shall I? Tasha Lem is an old friend of the Doctor's. They used to kind of knock around together a few hundred years ago when they were students and kind of were young and foolish. And as you know, even though Matt Smith's body is very young, because this incarnation of the Doctor appears to be very young, he's actually very old, as is Tasha, you know, hundreds of years old. She's a descendant of humans, so she has a kind of very, very long lifespan, a little bit like the Time Lords. We know that there are cracking monsters in this. We know that there are the Daleks, there are the cyborgs, the Cybermen, I should say. They're Cybermen. There are the angels, which are terribly frightening. I find them terribly frightening. They play to all your worst fears. And what's the fourth one? I can't actually remember what the fourth one is, but there is a fourth one.
The Silence.
The Silence. I should know that because they were part of my gang.
Fans are obviously sad to see Matt leaving. What was it like working with him on the last episode, and how emotional was it on set?
Well, it was clearly they were sad. Clearly Matt and Jenna were, you know, doing things together for the last time, and that was sad for them because they worked together so beautifully, and they're good friends, and they're very supportive of each other. So it was a little bit sad for them. Equally, though, they're professionals, and that's the deal. You know, things come to an end. We all do that. You do a show, you love working with people, and then at a certain point you have to say goodbye to it. And there was still a show to be shot, so it's not like everyone was lying around saying, "Oh, it's the last time." It's you got on with the shoot. So there was a tinge of it there, but it was a normal shoot at the same time.
Were you impressed seeing him in action? I think personally he's one of my favourite Doctors. Were you impressed seeing him in action?
Yeah, I mean, I would easily say he's a favourite Doctor of mine now, partly because I was working with him, and so I could see how, you know, beautifully he works and how very engaged he was in the script, in making every single scene work and every part of every scene in a way that you sometimes don't see with people who've been in a role for a long time. They kind of sit back on it a bit more, and he didn't. He was completely engaged in everything he was doing. He was really, you know, trying to make sure he found every aspect of a scene, all the physicality of it, all the heart of the character. So yeah, I mean, he's a huge favourite of mine. Having said that, I think there are many of the Doctors gave an excellent interpretation. It's apples and oranges. It's just the Doctor that resonates for you rather than a best Doctor, I think.
Obviously, we see the arrival of Peter in this episode. Did you get to work with him? Did you see him on set?
I didn't get to work with him on this. I've worked with him previously. I didn't get to do a scene with him on this. I've done my bit at that point. I met him. He came to set. He's a lovely man, and more to the point, I think he is going to be an extraordinarily good Doctor. I really, when the announcement happened, I just thought it's perfect. It's inevitable. It felt inevitable immediately that he would be the Doctor. And indeed, when we saw that little, you know, that little flash of his eyes on the 50th, it just felt right. It didn't feel like you had to get used to it or it was new. You just think, yeah, there's the Doctor. He felt like he's pre-existed. Yeah. You know.
Are you a bit of a sci-fi addict now? Are you a bit of a nerd?
I've become a bit of a nerd. I'm telling you, I'm buying an anorak. My husband, with the day that the 50th was on, my husband didn't want to see it, and so a mate of mine came up, and we got cups of tea and, you know, big packet of biscuits, and, you know, got a blanket and sat down and watched it. It was live. It was 11:30 in the morning in LA, and every so often my husband would come into the room and just shake his head and just go, "What's happened? What's happened?" And afterwards he said, "You used to come and watch art films with me, and now you've become this sci-fi geek." And I have, quite proudly. I think there's a huge point to sci-fi. I think it's a really, really interesting genre, and you can tell stories in the context of sci-fi that you can't tell if you're trying to kind of stay with realism, with naturalism.